Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. Guys, we're in for another episode. We're going into week 4. Pitt currently sitting at 3-0 with wins over Kent State, Cincinnati, and the West Virginia Mountaineers, sitting at 3-0 going into week 4 against Youngstown State, an FCS opponent who, for all in purpose, Pitt should really take care of this next weekend, and it should be a 4-0 start for the Pitt Panthers. But we'll go into what Pitt needs to do, what we need to see out of this game, a little bit of the stats from Youngstown State, what they look like, what they have, what they lost. We'll go into all that here tonight. Before we get started, guys, the show is sponsored by Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA 15102. Guys, as always, small business. Two great Pitt men, but more importantly, the selection that's currently there is always massive between light beers, heavier beers, obviously your IPAs, but more importantly, go in there and get the Icy Light can with the Pitt logo on it. Great partnership with Icy Light, but also, too, get the Fake Slide Pilsner, which helps support paying the players and help support Alliance 412, which is the preferred collective of the University of Pittsburgh. Again, guys, you guys see me post the pictures. Colonial Beer, a great place run by two great Pitt men. Before you head down to the stadium on Saturday for the home game, head out to Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA 15102. Guys, again, Pitt has gone on one heavy run, to say the least. They've done a good job up to this point. They haven't played a complete game yet. I think between Kent State, Cincinnati, and West Virginia, what you really saw was Kent State really one of the lower teams in the FBS in terms of what they're able to do. They recently suffered a loss to to St. Francis here in PA, St. Francis of PA, a team that we all know here in Pennsylvania. But you look at Cincinnati, a deficit of 27-6. Pitt comes back in the third and fourth quarter. They do a great job. They win the game 28-27. And then you see the same exact thing. We talked about the West Virginia game on the Sunday conversation, talking about how, look, it probably shouldn't have been a 10-point lead. Obviously, we gifted West Virginia 3 points to end the half. And then obviously West Virginia was able to get a touchdown late in the fourth quarter off of a face mask and pass interference call that was not called. Obviously, they got lucky on that, but the ball doesn't lie. The better team won as Pitt defeated the West Virginia Mountaineers 38-34. That's 2 wins up here in Pittsburgh, 2-1 in the current 4-game series over West Virginia. I think when you look at the resiliency of this Pitt football team, the way they performed, I look back at the tape, and again, one of the things I currently talked about from last week, one of the things I noticed is just not playing a complete game yet, and when I looked at that tape, to me, clearly, and from a number of different people, Pitt was the better team. I think West Virginia is going to have a really tough year overall. I think they'll be lucky to get to 5 wins. I think a bowl game will be tough for them to get to. But overall, when you look at this team, they haven't played a complete game yet. We'll go into different areas of what I think needs to happen. But before we get into what Pitt needs to do and what we need to see out of Pitt in this game, let's go over a little bit of the Youngstown State Penguins. Obviously, here in week 4, some of the things that are very noticeable, obviously, just from a couple notes here. Youngstown State currently, in their first 3 games, sitting at 1-2. 2 losses, obviously. The first game of the year, they lost 24-17 against Villanova. In week 2, they faced Division II Valparaiso. They beat them 59-25. And then they currently just lost to, this past week, to the Duquesne Dukes, obviously 28-25. Duquesne Dukes, obviously, Mickey Jacobs is over there, the defensive coordinator. Obviously, there's some relationships over there. Paul Gratton, the running back coach, obviously, he played at Villanova. He played offensive line at UCLA. I think overall, Duquesne's got a lot of good young coaches. Schmidt's been there for a long period of time. They got a lot of good people up there, a lot of good coaches. So a good win for them to come back, especially against the Duquesne, especially for Duquesne to go back and win that game against Youngstown State. One of the things that's very noticeable for the Youngstown State Penguins is you look at the previous roster from last year to this year, they were pretty much decimated by the transfer portal. Obviously, one of those players, Anthony Johnson, defensive tackle, playing for Pitt this year, obviously transferred to Illinois. during the spring semester, during the fall semester, after the fall season, ends up going to Illinois for a couple weeks, goes back into the portal and transfers to Pitt. He is currently at Pitt. Unfortunately, went through an injury. He'll be back during the latter portion of the year. Hope to get him back sooner than later. Obviously, wish nothing but the best for him. I think at a timetable, obviously towards the latter part of the year, but we'll see what happens. Obviously, great young man, young in age, so obviously we'd like to see him get back healthy, better than ever. That'll be great for him. Obviously, going up against his former team, he'll be there, obviously. But Youngstown State, when you look at their roster, they just lost a lot, and the majority of their overall starters to the transfer portal guys who jumped up to the next level. Obviously, Youngstown State made it to the playoffs last year, but with the amount of guys that they lost, this is not the same exact team. Diving into some of the stats from last week for Youngstown State, Bo Bungard was 19-29, the Youngstown State quarterback, 19-29, 193 yards passing, 6.7 average, no touchdown passes, but one interception. You look at the Youngstown State running game, they rushed for 178 yards. And I think when you look at overall for Youngstown State, they're going to want to try to run the football. That's what they're known for. And this will be a great game for Pitt because I want to see more consistency out of Pitt's defense overall, more consistency out of Pitt's defensive line. And we'll talk a little bit more about why Pitt's defense, maybe, why they haven't been as consistent, why that's, certain schematics of what needs to change. Obviously, though, when you look at the Youngstown State, 178 yards rushing on 44 attempts, which is crazy to think about. Starter Tyshawn King, 15 carries for 67 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a longest run of 12 yards. Another running back, Ethan Wright, 13 carries, 61 yards. And then Bo Bumgard, obviously the quarterback, he ended up having 12 carries for 39 yards and a 1 rushing touchdown. Obviously, Bo can run a good bit. I think Pitt's going to be in a situation again where they saw last week to this week, a quarterback who can run, very much fluent in terms of being able to use his legs. I think after last week against, obviously Garrett Green, we didn't get to see too much out of Garrett Green in terms of good passing. He struggled with the passing game, only throwing 50% completion percentage at under, just over 200 yards passing. This will be a good challenge for Pitt. Again, in terms of being able to watch them, how they throw the football, but obviously too containing him. But more importantly, watching how this team stops the run. That's kind of the big thing for me, what Pitt needs to do and what we want to see on a consistent basis. But overall, even in the receiving game for Youngstown State, Max Tomzak, 5 receptions for 62 yards. Latrell Fordham, 6 catches for 50 yards. And Cyrus Traw, 2 catches for 35 yards. Obviously, 3 guys you want to watch there. When you look at Youngstown State's defense, Darius Paranis, who was the quarterback for Duquesne, was 17-26 for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Youngstown State allowed 157 yards passing, but also Youngstown State allowed 189 yards rushing on only 17 carries. Jamario Clements of Duquesne rushed, for 12 times for 204 yards. I mean, the guy actually absolutely tore it up. Had a long run of 75 yards, 1 touchdown, 17-yard average. So clearly, Youngstown State's having a difficult time this year, obviously, with all the guys that left from last year. One of the things they're clearly really struggling with is the rushing attack. And the same thing with Pitt. I think to the extent of maybe Pitt's not as bad, but Youngstown State is having an issue with running the football. I expect Pitt to be able to run the football, but obviously to pass the football as well. Pitt should be able to take care of business overall in terms of what they need to do. I think for me personally, if there's one thing we learned about Pitt football over the years, you never take any team lightly. You never take any team lightly. Every team you take the same. Youngstown State obviously had a couple close games with Pitt, especially back, I think it was in 2016. It was in 2017 when Youngstown State was here at Acrisure Stadium. And obviously it was a close game all the way to the wire. Even had to go to overtime. I don't expect that to happen on Saturday. But Pitt needs to take this seriously and do what it needs to do to get this thing cleaned up, at the halftime mark, to where you get the starters out, you put the backups in, get other people reps, make sure you stay healthy. That's the number one thing. Make sure your starters stay healthy. You don't want to see any injuries to your starters. And that's the most important thing. Stay healthy, get the W, go into conference play at 4-0. And if I'm not mistaken, Pitt should have a bye week. But let me just check here. Let me see here. Youngstown State, the 21st. So, yeah, they'll have a bye week after Youngstown State. So, obviously, the bye week comes a little bit earlier, but I think they have one later on in the year. But obviously, Youngstown State, a bye week before they head down to North Carolina, a place that Pitt has not won at. So, you really, the whole point is you really want to see Pitt take care of business. Obviously, Pitt faces Youngstown State at home at Acrisure Stadium at 3:30 in the afternoon. So, you really want to see Pitt take care of business overall on Saturday. No messing around. Get done with it and do what you need to do. Things that I want to see Pitt really clear up this week. And overall, I talked to people last week. People were saying, some Pitt fans were like, oh, well, Pitt got dominated on both sides of the football on the line of scrimmage. I disagree. The offensive line, okay, overall, yes, gave up 5 sacks. But I would say about 50 to 60% of the time, you look at overall the pocket, Eli Holstein had plenty of good time. He was able to make throws. I think the discrepancy, what people don't realize from last week for Pitt, is that in the third quarter, they only had the ball twice. The remaining portion of that time was West Virginia. And I think the main fact is obviously West Virginia couldn't throw the ball. Their passing attack looked mediocre. But they were looking to run the football and use as much time as they possibly could. Only 2 possessions in the third quarter, which is very well noticeable. I think West Virginia had the ball for over 12 minutes just in the third quarter, which led to only 6 total yards of offense in the third quarter and going into the fourth quarter. And when you look overall before the 4-minute mark in the fourth quarter, Pitt only possessed the ball in the second half 3 times. In the final 5 minutes or final, roughly 4.5 minutes, they possessed the ball 2 times. Tells you, where the Pitt defense was in terms of just not being able to get off the field and how West Virginia was able to really, 1, possess the ball, but obviously 2, Pitt had a blocked punt. The blocked punt resulted into a touchdown, but just gave the ball back to West Virginia, which allowed them to even have the ball even longer. I think overall, when you look, for me personally, I want to see a full, complete game overall. Number 1, a full, complete game on offense, defense, and special teams from Pitt this week. That's number 1. I think overall, looking at Pitt, they haven't played a complete game yet. They had to come back in the third and fourth quarter against Youngstown State. They had to come back in the fourth quarter against West Virginia. Let's see them play a complete game from beginning to end. That's what we truly want to see, especially as you go into a bye week to get healthy, as you get ready for North Carolina. Number 1, I want to see this team play a complete game. Number 2, I want to see this team start fast. We talked about how they talk about wanting to start fast, getting off to a good pace. Well, against Cincinnati and against West Virginia, that first drive of the game did not go according to plan. They didn't score points. The first drive of the game against Cincinnati, they drove down the field. But unfortunately, Eli threw an interception, turned into a turnover. In week 3, obviously, went a 3-and-out against West Virginia to start the game until the second drive of the game. They went down and hit 3 points. What you want to see out of this team is I want to see them actually go out and start fast. Go down the field like it did against Kent State. Go down the field, score a touchdown or at least a field goal. Start on a strong note, get out front early, and start playing in front of the opponent. That's what you want to see out of this team. So, in reality, number 1, a complete game. Number 2, start fast. Number 3, I want to see this offensive line play stout. One of the things that was very noticeable was that West Virginia, unlike the first game of the year against Penn State and the second game of the year against Albany, West Virginia blitzed a shit ton against this Pitt offensive line. A lot of times it was able to pick it up. The other times it was not. West Virginia was running a lot of stunts, and the stunts that they were running were certainly catching Pitt off guard in terms of the blocking scheme that they were looking to possess. The offensive line overall, I thought B.J. Williams had a really good day. I think the ebbs and flows, Ryan Baird played good at portions. He struggled at times, had a couple of holding calls, had to get a beat a couple times. Same thing with Branson Taylor. Was able to play good at decent times during the game, but then struggled at points. And then Lyndon Cooper, I thought, again, played well at points, but then really struggled at times to where picking up the blitzes, but more importantly, the certain stunts that West Virginia was running, there seemed to be some miscommunication there. This week, I really want to see this offensive line work in a unison. Play a full, complete game. Keep it under 2 sacks. You never, you aim for perfection, but hey, keep it under 2 sacks. Give Eli time. Keep him healthy. Keep him upright. That's what we want to see in a game against an FCS opponent. No messing around. Play the game the way it should be played, and especially too against an FCS opponent. You're going into week 4. You want to see this team take care of business, put up big points, get out of the first half up big, go into halftime. Let Nate Yarnell come in. Let the second offensive line come in. Get out of this game really healthy. I want to see Pitt and that offensive line take care of business. Number 4, I want to see this defensive line really step up and play, again, a full, complete game and be able to stop the run. I want to see this team stop the run overall consistently throughout the entire game. I want to see this team from a perspective of, when you look at the pass rush, Nate Matlack, Sincere Edwards, Jimmy Scott, even the Kai Johnson. We saw a bunch of those guys get pressure in the backfield whenever they needed to. But overall, when you looked at from the top to bottom, they got there, but they didn't complete the play. I want to see Pitt complete the play. When you get pressure back there, we've seen the numbers from Nate Matlack, people talking about, there's not enough pressure from the Pitt defensive line. I disagree. There is pressure from the Pitt defensive line, but they're not finishing the play. I want to see Nate Matlack get a sack or 2 in this game. I want to see Jimmy Scott take care of business, get a sack or 2 in this game. In the middle, I want to see Nakai Johnson take care of business like he has been. Nick James continue to play at a high level. Isaiah Neal struggled a little bit. He had a little bit of a difficult time against West Virginia, was moved around quite a bit in terms of being able to get moved by Brandon Yates in the middle. I want to see Isaiah Neal have a bounce-back game this week, play at the level that we know he is, the 4-star defensive tackle that we know he is. Same thing with Elliott Donald. Struggled a little bit last week. He's going to get some time this week. I don't expect, obviously, Anthony Johnson or Sean Fitzsimmons to be back. We need Elliott Donald to get back to the form of, hey, progression. We like to see what he's done. Obviously, in portions of that game against West Virginia, Elliott Donald did a really good job. But now we want to see growth. We want to see a complete game to when you're in the backfield, you're making a play. The same thing goes with Chief Borders. I think he's had times, not as many pressures as obviously Nate Matlack, Sincere Edwards, or Jimmy Scott. But overall, I think Chief Borders needs to continue to grow in this progression, grow in terms of the defensive end position. See more and more overall, continue to see him play. Lastly, I want to see overall the defense keep the rushing attack under 100 yards, but even the passing game under 200 yards is the final aspect of this game. I think that when you look at Pitt's overall defense, they've been in good position at times. But I think when you look at the tape, like I have, and I've watched it numerous times now, Pitt's run stunts numerous of times where they've lost gap control, where they've been around the pocket to where they've almost opened up too many big gaps, and teams have taken advantage of that and being able to run the football. So when Pitt runs their stunts, I want guys to stay in their gaps and stay in their alignments of what they're able to do and where the gaps are they're looking to hit. When they're not running stunts, I want them to take care of their gaps. Technique-wise, be firm in technique. A lot like what Charlie Partridge taught, a lot what Tim Dowse is teaching today. We want to see these guys play in their gaps and stop the run. On the back end, I want to see this defense be able to, one, Rylan Gandy continue to play at the level he is. Taman Lynham continue to really progress, be that guy that we need him to be, the physical cornerback that we knew he was what he was coming out of Nebraska, and Rashad Battle continue to play at a high level. But also, too, let's find out who 3, 4, and 5 are. Get past a certain point of the game where it's such a big lead, we can put other guys in there to find out what we have behind them. And obviously, too, the linebackers continue to play at a high level. Kyle Lewis, keep him out there for a little bit, obviously, but if he's getting tired, take him off the field. Let's get out of this game healthy and 110%. Overall, I'm going to look at this game as a score prediction. I think when you look at this game, I think it shouldn't be a problem for Pitt. I think Pitt's going to do a really good job, go 4-0 overall. Be the first time in Pitt history that Pitt takes care of business and the non-conference schedule for the first time ever, which is crazy to think about. Even the 2021 year, they couldn't go undefeated because they lost to Western Michigan. I don't think they do that this year. Pat Narduzzi talked about how there should not be a let-up or he's going to get in people's ass and he's going to be really upset. So overall, I think Pitt wins this game 51-14. People might think, hey, it's too big of a score. I think Cade Bell, since we're already past the vanilla style of this offense, vanilla style. Obviously, we're in week 4. They're not going to hold back at all. I think 51-14 would be the sounding of the score. Obviously, I think we'd all be happy if they did. If they eventually won that game by that much, and it should work overall in Pitt's favor to be successful at what they need to do. So, guys, again, I appreciate you tuning in to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Guys, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It helps out to grow the channel. We've done a great job because of each and every one of you, and we appreciate everything that you do to support the channel. So I cannot thank you enough. Obviously, I'll see you all down at Acrisure Stadium at 3:30 or beforehand, obviously, for the tailgating. But I'll see you down at Acrisure Stadium where Pitt takes on Youngstown State at 3:30 in the afternoon. Guys, as always and forever, hail to Pitt. Be good out there. Hail to the ACC.